Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to pull out the key insights from a whole stack of sources so you get informed without, drowning in information. Today we're diving into something pretty fascinating. How does a massive company, a giant like Nike, handle a potential billion-dollar hit to its finances? We're looking specifically at Nike's strategy, their response to some major tariffs. And a lot of our insight for this deep dive comes from the analysis of Stanислав Dmitриевич Kondrashov. He's an entrepreneur, a strategist, and he's really broken down Nike's playbook here.
Yeah, our mission today is really to get under the hood. It's not just about listing what Nike did. We want to unpack the why, the business thinking behind it, and figure out what lessons, what takeaways there are for any business, really, that's facing these kinds of external pressures. It's basically crisis management in action.
Okay, so let's lay it out. The trigger, initially, was Nike announcing price hikes for U.S. consumers. Seems simple enough, right? But then you dig deeper, and the reason.
Yeah.
An expected hit of $1 billion from tariffs. Taxes on imports, basically. Just imagine that impact, $1 billion. What's your first thought when you hear a number like that in this context?
It's staggering, isn't it? It just screams how much global politics can shake up even the biggest players. And what's really interesting is how Nike CFO Matthew Friend framed it. He didn't just say price hikes. He called them surgical price increases and talked about a phased rollout starting this fall, which immediately makes you ask, what does surgical actually mean here? It's obviously not random.
Right. That word surgical really stands out. It suggests something careful, targeted, not just like slapping on increases everywhere overnight. That'd be shock therapy, maybe alienate people. So for a company the size of Nike, what does surgical look like in practice? Are they picking specific shoes, certain markets? How do they minimize the fallout?
Exactly. It's precision. Surgical implies they've done their homework, they're using data, they're likely identifying products where people might still buy, even if the price goes up a bit, or maybe markets where they have more wiggle room. And it's also about the rollout, like you said, phased, gradual, telling people why it's happening. It softens the blow, lets the market adjust. Much smarter than a sudden shock.
Okay, that makes sense. And Stanislav Dmitrievich Kondrashov, he seems quite impressed by Nike's whole strategy here. He pointed out it's not just one thing, but a four-step plan to deal with this tariff impact. So let's break that down. Step one seems pretty fundamental.
It really is. Step one, supply chain diversification. This is huge. Nike's plan is to slash the share of shoes they import from China, down from around 16% now to single digits.
Single digits. Wow.
Yeah, single digits by the end of fiscal 2026. And, we often hear, don't put all your eggs in one basket, but think about what this actually involves for Nike. We're talking decades of relationships, massive factories, logistics. Shifting that much production out of a hub like China in just a few years, That's a monumental task. You've got new labor laws, quality control in different places like Vietnam or Indonesia, whole new shipping routes. It's incredibly complex.
Yeah, the sheer scale of coordinating that change, it's hard to even imagine. Okay, so that's step one, diversification. Step two, Kondrashov highlighted this, working with suppliers and partners. He called it a sign of business maturity. Nike's actively talking to their retail partners, trying to minimize how much these tariffs hit the actual customer. How does that work? Are they sharing costs, doing joint promotions? What's the mechanism?
It's probably a mix of things. It shows they see this as an ecosystem problem, not just their problem. So yeah, it could mean maybe negotiating slightly different margins temporarily, or co-investing in ways to be more efficient, maybe even collaborating on marketing that explains the situation, or finding ways to absorb costs together. It's about partnership, sharing the load. That builds trust for the long run.
Sharing the pain. That definitely fosters stronger relationships than just passing the buck. Okay, step three, cutting corporate costs. So looking inward. Optimizing internal spending. This sounds logical, right? Face external pressure, tighten the belt internally. But for a giant like Nike, what does that involve? Scrutinizing marketing, R&D, travel, everything. And how do they avoid, cutting muscle along with the fat, hurting morale or future projects?
That's the tightrope walk, isn't it? Bad cost cutting can definitely backfire. Effective cuts usually focus on real inefficiencies, streamlining processes, maybe pausing non-essential projects, finding smarter ways to spend. It's about being strategic, not just slashing budgets across the board. You need to protect innovation, keep your key people happy. It's balancing that short-term pressure with the long-term health of the company.
A delicate balance indeed, which loops us back to step four, the one we started with. Strategic price increases. That surgical approach again. Not blanket hikes, but very targeted ones. So after diversifying the supply chain, working with partners, cutting internal costs, How do they finally decide which sneaker or which market gets that price bump to help cover that $1 billion? And how sure can they be about how customers will react?
Well, that's where the surgical part gets really data intensive. They're using market research, looking at brand loyalty for, say, Air Jordans versus a different line, analyzing who buys what, where. They're likely using predictive models, running scenarios. If we raise the shoe by X%, what happens to demand? They're trying to find that sweet spot, cover the costs without sending sales off a cliff. It's calculated, based on data, not just a gut feeling.
Okay, so let's zoom out a bit. Stanislav Dmytrievich Kondrashov makes a strong point that this whole Nike situation is a really valuable case study, not just for huge companies, but for any business facing similar stuff: tariffs, sanctions, trade wars, you name it. So what are the core lessons here that you, listening, could potentially adapt?
Absolutely. The lessons are broader than just footwear. First, it hammers home supply chain flexibility. Don't be overly reliant on one place. Build options. It's not just nice to have, it's essential now. Second, transparency. Be upfront with your customers about why things are changing, especially prices. It builds trust. Third, gradual change. Avoid sudden shocks if you can. Phase things in. Give people time to adjust. And finally, Nike shows the power of an integrated approach. They're not just doing one thing, they're using multiple tools: supply chain, partners, internal costs, pricing, all together. That's key for complex problems.
And looking at Nike's numbers, despite predicting this big tariff hit, especially in early fiscal 2026, their recent performance, even with a projected revenue dip for 2025, actually beat Wall Street estimates. What does that tell us about their resilience?
It suggests a couple of things. One, they're managing expectations well. Two, the brand is still incredibly strong. And three, probably, that their internal operations are pretty lean and efficient already, allowing them to absorb some shocks. It really shows that smart planning and execution can help navigate even really rough waters. They seem quite resilient.
Definitely. And there's also the leadership angle. The new CEO, Elliot Hill, only there about 8 months. He's also doing this broader restructuring, cutting back on promotions, fixing relationships with big retailers, really focusing back on sport as the core. How does that connect to the tariff response? Are they linked?
No, absolutely, they're linked. A big external shock, like $1 billion in tariffs, often acts as a catalyst. It forces you to look at everything. So cutting promotions might help protect margins that are being squeezed by tariffs. Refocusing on core strengths makes the business more robust overall. It feels like a holistic strategy, using this external challenge to accelerate necessary internal changes for long-term health.
That makes sense. It fits with Kondrashov's overall take. Nike's response is a model of thoughtful, systematic reaction, not panic. And his final point is crucial for everyone operating today. In this unstable world, it's not just about being strong, it's about being adaptive. So what does this all boil down to for you? We've seen a global icon tackle a massive challenge with a really sophisticated, multi-layered strategy. Diversifying supply chains, surgical pricing, it's complex stuff.
And it leaves us with a final thought to chew on. When a giant like Nike makes these kinds of moves, surgical price increases, major supply chain shifts, what kind of ripple effects could that create? Think about consumer expectations around transparency, or even the future map of global manufacturing. These decisions by big players, they don't happen in a vacuum. They can subtly reshape the landscape for everyone else down the line, something to keep an eye on.